I wanted to take an opportunity to bring up an issue. That issue is context. The crisis in the church is not happening in a vacuum. The church is both a spiritual and material institution and operates in the material realm. The church operates in the world, even if the church is supposed to stand in stark opposition to the values of the world, and has lately not only failed to stand in the way of those values, but has often enough embraced them. This video will be the first part of an infrequent series that goes over the conditions of the world that are directly relevant to the situation in the church. I doubt I'll go over partisan politics because, while I care about partisan politics, that's not the purpose of my work here. So don't worry, I'm unlikely to comment on those Supreme Court confirmation hearings going on right now, unless people really want me to do so. Previously, I had done a video called They're Coming for Your Children, which detailed a specific set of efforts made by the secular world to corrupt your children by pushing the San Francisco lifestyle on children at an increasingly young age. I'll be revisiting that topic today. If you want to watch that video despite its, shall we say, audio problems, the link is in the description. But to understand this push to groom your children, you have to understand the leftist takeover of education. You've probably heard about the long march through the institutions that the left began some time ago. The first organizations the left did this with was organized labor and education. The American education system finds its roots in the Catholic parochial system and in Thomas Jefferson's Virginia schools model. The godfather of the modern American education system, however, is John Dewey, who some consider to be one of America's finer political minds. While Dewey had interesting things to say about freedom, technology, and the Western way of life, Dewey was profoundly a proto-socialist thinker. Dewey is in fact the father of much of the radicalism of today. In his 1935 book, Liberalism and Social Action, Dewey said, quote, "If radicalism can be defined as perception of need for radical change, then today any liberalism which is not also radicalism is irrelevant and doomed." End quote. In 1928, Dewey wrote lovingly of the Soviet Union's education and broader system so-called reforms, calling them a, quote, "release of human powers on such an unprecedented scale that it is of incalculable significance not only for that country, but for the world," end quote. He lamented that if these changes were not brought to the U.S. broadly, then the U.S. would be doomed to civil war. Dewey's effect on the education system of the United States is profound. He is credited for focusing childhood education on the development of practical skills and focusing the learning process on students actually doing what they're expected to learn. But beyond that, Dewey was a proponent of progressive reforms of education, saying, quote, "We must conceive of schools as agencies for bringing home to the child some of the primal necessities of community life, as instrumentalities through which the school itself shall be made a genuine form of active community life, instead of a place set apart in which to learn lessons. As one enters a busy kitchen in which a group of children are actively engaged in the preparation of food, the psychological difference, the change from more or less passive and inert recipiency and restraint to one of buoyant outgoing energy, it is so obvious as fairly to strike one in the face. By the introduction into the school of various forms of active occupation, the entire spirit of the school is renewed. It has a chance to affiliate itself with life, to become the child's habitat, where he learns through directed learning, instead of being only a place to learn lessons, having an abstract and remote reference to some possible living to be done in the future. It gets a chance to be a miniature community, an embryonic society. To do this means to make each one of our schools an embryonic community life, active with the types of occupation that reflect the life of larger society." End quote. The idea of schools as a community has had real-world consequences. Today we see activism on college campuses rooted in the idea that students are not merely there to attend schools, but to have a happy home at those universities. We see schools today substituting for the home life in many ways, including in the sexual education of children. I know of people my age whose parents expected their children to be taught how to shave while at schools, or to receive the most rudimentary sex education at schools. Why? Because of this progressive idea of the school, which is to replace community. While Dewey says in an earlier paragraph that the student is to learn real skills to help the community in their vocations later in life, his real purpose of turning schools into a community is revealed in the passage above. In other words, Dewey defines his view of human nature, which underscores his understanding of education. He views human beings as creatures who are by nature inextricably bound up in culture, a view which entails that human beings are by nature free, but that freedom is not a given quality or feature of human life. and this natural state of affairs in turn entails that education is crucial for the achievement of freedom and thereby also for human fulfillment. Human culture perpetrates itself in its form of education. This is the linchpin of understanding the secular left and their iron grip on education. It is through the education process that culture, moral norms, and values are promoted. As one example that should hit home for any Catholic that's still listening to this, if you or your child go to college, they have an 80% chance of losing their faith by the end of their freshman year. That's according to data gathered by Southern Baptists, and I have no reason to doubt the veracity of that data. I spent a lot of time in higher education, both in pursuing my own PhD and in working in higher education, and I can say from my first-hand experience that most, if not all, the courses involve some form of cultural indoctrination. If you need proof of this, you only have to look at the popular narrative about, quote, white privilege or cultural appropriation or so-called rape culture, or one that literally every Catholic who has gone through the public education system since at least the 1980s has experienced. The profoundly anti-Catholic narrative the American and broadly Western public education system promotes. If you meet young people who mindlessly parrot the alleged crimes of the Church during the Holy Inquisition or the Crusades or other stories about the Church suppressing science, that is a reflection of Dewey's process of promoting what he calls freedom. But today, this attempt at breaking down the culture of the West has taken a bizarre turn. The San Francisco lobby has gained a stranglehold in public schools across the country. Here's one example from about a year ago, but it is relevant today. It's reporting from CBS News. Please forgive the odd quality of the video. In order to avoid a copyright slam on my channel, I had to play around with the video quality.
And what I will share over and over again is how proud I was of my students.
An emotional Rockland Academy teacher addressing a packed house of parents, many furious about her decision to discuss the topic of gender identity inside her kindergarten class.
It was never my intent to harm any students, only to support them through a difficult situation.
The teacher defended her actions to read 2 books she says were given to her by a transgender child going through a transition.
The kindergartners came home very confused about whether or not you can pick your gender, whether or not they really were a boy or a girl.
Parents say besides the books, the transgender student at some point during class also changed clothes and was revealed as her true gender. And many parents say they feel betrayed and blindsided.
I want her to hear from me as a parent what her gender identity means to her and to our family. Not from a book that may be controversial.
My daughter went home crying, shaking, so afraid that she could turn into a boy.
The issue was not on the agenda, so parents spoke out during Monday night's public comment.
It's really about the parents being informed and involved and, giving us the choice and the rights about, what's getting introduced to our kids and at what age.
Many teachers also speaking out in support of what transpired inside the classroom on the last days of the academic year.
Head in the direction of banned books or book lists or selected literature that should only be read inside or outside of the classroom. I think that that's a very dangerous direction to go.
This is endemic to public schools. Here's another clip. It's from a school teacher speaking at a Southern Baptist education conference on the subject of the indoctrination that the secular schools in Texas are pushing on kids. In Texas. Again, no place is safe.
And at the beginning of the 2015 and 2016 year, that's when I was teaching pre-K there at that school, and our faculty was trained in the Welcoming Schools program. If you've never heard of it, it's an anti-bullying program. They say it's not a curriculum, it's a program that celebrates diversity and requires inclusivity by abolishing children's and teachers' biased notions of family and gender norms. Welcoming Schools claims that it is creating safe and supportive environments for all students, which is taught to students as young as 4 years old. It affirms same-sex marriage parenting, gay and lesbian relationships, and transgenderism. And it's funded by the Human Rights Campaign, the largest LGBT political lobby organization in the U.S. And for the first time in 9 years at Odom, we would be spending 6 hours of training over a non-academic topic. And I was really confused about this because at Odom Elementary, we are a Title I school. And if you know anything about the Title I program, that means that you have a predominant population that is economically disadvantaged. In other words, in poverty. And so we struggle in every subject area, reading, writing, math, and science, everything. And so usually the year would begin where you're talking about your testing scores, right? Remember all those tests you guys take? Well, that's what we do. When we go back to school the week before you guys do, we sit down and we strategize and talk about how to bridge the gaps academically. How did third grade do? How did fifth grade do? How did seventh grade do? How did ninth grade do? In math, reading, and science, and writing. Well, instead, we were going to spend 6 sessions in welcoming schools. We didn't hear anything about academics. So as the year progressed, I asked the trainers a lot of questions. Why are we doing this program? Your principal requested the program, they said. And I told them, I said, this doesn't make sense to me because we already have No Place for Hate. That's an anti-bullying program that Austin and many cities in Texas and around the country are using. We didn't particularly emphasize any community. It was respect for everyone, treating everyone fairly the way you want to be treated, and there were no exceptions. So I was confused about that. And I asked them another question. I said, is there a letter to inform the parents? And they said, no. No, we haven't talked about that. And that was a real problem for me because the families I served had come to see me an advocate for their children and their academic future because a lot of my parents were young, obviously because they have 4-year-old children, and because most of them were immigrants. And they wanted to see their kids succeed, but they just didn't know where to begin. They didn't know how to start. Many of themselves not finishing school and being illiterate in the English language. So that was a problem for me, and they trusted me. And now I felt I was being trained to circumvent their family's values without them knowing. And so I asked another question, well, how are we going to teach these lessons? And they said, well, you're going to simply roll it into the social-emotional learning time, which is a character education. You know, when you're teaching kids to share and cooperate, that's the time you're going to roll these in. So let me tell you about one of the other sessions that we had. As the pre-K through 5th grade teachers that we were being instructed to come up with a definition for the word homosexual that our students could understand. And we had to be able to explain it to our students and to say that gay love was beautiful. We were informed that our library would be filled with books, like this one. This one's targeted toward, oops, that's not it. There it is. This book is targeted toward early childhood up to 2nd grade, okay? And so this book, Jacob's New Dress, is a book that celebrates a little boy that wants to wear dresses to school. And so when he gets to school, one day he finally does. His parents say, okay, you can wear this dress to school. And so the teacher, they're sitting around and they're having their little story time, as teachers do in early childhood classrooms, and she says, oh, this is wonderful. She tells all the students that this is wonderful. So, this is another book. It's called It's Perfectly Normal. And this is a book, let me tell you what's in this book. This is an elementary school book. It's a graphically illustrated book, as you can see. It has promiscuity, homosexual exploration, sexual intercourse, street language, masturbation techniques, abortion as an escape from unwanted pregnancy, and this book is targeted for 9 and 10-year-olds.
If you think this isn't hitting the church, think again. Recall Father Kalchik being driven into hiding because Cardinal Cupich wanted to punish him for burning the San Francisco lifestyle flag that had been flying proudly in his parish when it had been an occupied parish. And then there's the case of everyone's favorite Jesuit minister, Pastor Jimmy Martin, who advocates a softening of church teaching on San Francisco lifestyle teachings because the issues haven't been, quote, received by Catholics living that lifestyle. If you think this hasn't made its way into the Catholic school system, think again, as the case of St. Mary's Academy for Girls in Portland, Oregon illustrates. In 2016, St. Mary's Academy for Girls in the People's Republic of Portland fired a staff member who was openly practicing the San Francisco lifestyle in violation of church teaching and archdiocesan policy. That policy was part of the school's policy. The staffer took the job knowing full well what the policy was and disclosed the situation after she was hired. She was then terminated, and then she sued the school. The school settled out of court and then changed their policy. If you walk the halls of that school, which I have, you will see that the school is nominally Catholic as is, with posters on the walls advocating for San Francisco inclusion, feminism, and paganism. But I repeat myself. St. Mary's Academy is a high-ranked Catholic school in Portland known for offering a high-quality education. But it is funded by money from community donors, including major corporations with direct or secondary ties to abortion mills and the pornography industry. The school isn't really Catholic, as it has largely abandoned its Catholic mission years ago. A priest I spoke with was not permitted to have the assistance of a permanent deacon at the Mass celebrated in their chapel for the students because, according to what the administrators there told him, there were already too many men at the altar already with his celebrating of the Mass. Think about that for a second. This is a direct result of the long march through the institutions and the acceptance of Dewey's revolutionary education model on the schools. Dewey and his successors, including and especially in the Frankfurt School, have utilized the schools in the U.S. and abroad to promote their revolutionary ideology. For the sake of your children and their souls, homeschool your kids. I don't care if you live in the most conservative part of the U.S. or Canada. These people have infiltrated the schools virtually everywhere. Homeschool your kids. If you like videos like this, please like this video and subscribe. I can be found on Twitter and Facebook with links in the description. For Return to Tradition, I'm Anthony Stein. Viva Cristo Rey.